today's presentation is about installations and zones. So when I first started working for Project Fire, which I think was about 8 years ago now, the director at the time was very keen about getting this terminology right. So when I say getting it right, this is to do with sprinklers. Other industries use the same words, but they mean slightly different things. So, for example, in the sort of fire detection industry, when they talk about zoning their building as far as where the heat and smoke detectors go, that sometimes gets confusing when you then start talking about zones in a sprinkler context. Then you've also got other things like sort of security zones. So yeah, there's lots of other industries which have kind of similar terminology. So what I'm talking about here is the sprinkler terminology, getting these three words correct. So system, installation, and zone. So you can see on the screen there, I've got a picture, a sort of diagram. Yeah, my first question is, how many sprinkler systems can you see? So on that screen there, how many sprinkler systems are there on the screen? The answer is 1. Okay, so we've got 1 sprinkler system. Now you can see that there are 2 water supplies. Okay, so this is showing a duplicate supply. We've got 2 pumps. We can assume them to be 100% capacity. 2, say, full capacity tanks and 2 pumps. So we have what's called a duplicate water supply. So effectively, we've got 2 water supplies, but they're both feeding at the same pipe, and therefore, we have 1 sprinkler system on show here. And that's generally the case. It's very unlikely there to be more than 1 sprinkler system on a building. It's not impossible though. It might be a very large building, so you might want to split it completely into 2 different systems, or it might be that you've got 2 very dissimilar risks, and you want to have 2 systems, one for the kind of the lower hazard and one for the higher hazard. But let's say vast majority of times you've got 1 sprinkler system on any particular building project or site, because we're only designing for 1 fire at any one time. So you could have 1 sprinkler system covering quite a very large area and various different buildings. So you might have like a campus setup where you've got lots of buildings on one site. Again, it would be normal to have 1 sprinkler system, 1 water supply for that whole area, so on the basis that you're going to be pretty unlucky to have 2 separate fires at any one time. So the answer to the first question, say, is 1. Second question is, how many installations are there? So that's a little bit more tricky. The answer is, how many can you see on the screen? The answer is 3, although the pipework does sort of disappear off on the left-hand side. So there's probably some more installations which aren't shown on the screen. Otherwise, it'd be a case of, okay, why have we got this pipe disappearing off the left-hand side if it's not actually going anywhere? But yeah, how many can you actually see on the screen? The answer is 3, and you can see I've shown those in blue, sort of blue highlighter. So each installation starts with an installation control valve or alarm valve. Basically, you count the number of installation control valves, and that will equal the number of installations on your sprinkler system. And again, we're going to go on to this later, but yeah, it might just be, again, normally it's because you've got different buildings, but each building would have a separate installation. But also it might just be area. You've got a very large area to protect, in which case you may have to split it into different installations. My next question is, how many sprinkler zones can you see? So again, have a look at the screen. Again, some of these zones are probably disappearing off the edge of the screen. So I make it 8. 8 that we can see. The 8th one is just one sprinkler head on the left-hand side there. And again, there's probably going to be more zones that we can't see. But of the ones we can, we've got 8 shown there on the screen. Each zone is going to start with an isolation valve and then a float switch. So those are kind of the answer to the questions. That's like an introduction to what I'm talking about. So let's answer these 2 questions here. Why split it into different installations, and why then split it into different zones? So splitting it in different installations, I've kind of already covered really. It may well be due to convenience. So you've got, say, different buildings. So you'd have a different installation for each building, keeps everything nice and separate. So you know what is protecting what. What you don't want to happen is a case where you've got pipes sort of crisscrossing around the place. You're never quite sure which pipe goes where, because when it comes to draining the system down or doing some maintenance work, turning valves, shutting off valves, it's good to know exactly what you're doing, because obviously the big danger is that you close a valve and you think, right, that's isolated. We can drain that down now. You start to drain it down, and I've got the wrong one. We've got fire pumps starting, and we've got loads of water coming out of this pipe. So yeah, it's good to know what's protecting what, and so it's almost like convenience, keeping it neat, having different installations at key points, so it's kind of obvious. Okay, that's protecting that, and that's protecting that. Also, say it's down to size, and this is again just down to frictional loss calculations. It just helps with the calculations of pipes, frictional loss, making sure that we get the minimum pressure at each sprinkler head. By splitting them into different installations, it just means that we get to kind of start afresh with a new installation, which is being fed directly off the water supply, and then we can move forward again. We can't just keep adding more and more pipe, because the water is going to have to travel a much even further distance to get to the sprinkler heads. So that's why there's limits on the size of each installation. As I say, it also means that when it comes to doing maintenance, we can shut down just one installation at a time. If we want to do any repair work, for example, if you want to add some sprinkler heads, do something that involves isolating and draining down, then we've got certain installations that we can do that at. We don't have to shut the whole system off at once. And that's kind of the same thing regarding the zoning. I've got a quote here from Annex F of 12045, which says only one zone of a multi-zone installation shall be shut down at a time. An installation or zone shall be shut down only for the minimum time necessary for maintenance. Partial or complete shutdown of an installation shall be avoided wherever possible. Only, and again, so this is kind of repeating itself, only the smallest part of the installation necessary shall be isolated. So all of that is basically talking about the fact that this sprinkler system is there to do a job, a very important job. We need to shut down or isolate the smallest part possible. So obviously, the more parts you have, then the greater flexibility you have in terms of shutting down a small part to do some maintenance on. If you only got one big lump, then it's either on or it's off. If you've got lots of smaller areas, then you've got more flexibility in terms of how you're kind of managing that. So let's say that's a quote from the rules. And say zoning is really very similar. There are some limitations. So there's maximum size of any zone. We want to have the ability to isolate each zone. But each sprinkler zone also has a flow switch. So we're getting some more information in terms of where the activation has taken place. And again, that's very useful now. We're having that kind of digital signal to say there's an activation in this area here. and that signal can be passed on to various other panels and systems to kind of manage that, do some cause and effect with it, start putting the evacuation plan into action, opening doors, smoke vents, curtains, sort of closing off maybe one side to say, you've got to evacuate through these doors, not those doors, all based on where the activation has taken place. We can be quite clever with that these days. And obviously, so the more zones you have, the more flow switches you have, the more information you've got to then bring that forward. What I should say is that all of this information is looking at industrial and commercial sprinklers that are under 12845. We do have sprinkler systems, installations and zones under residential and domestic, but it's kind of a different world really. So what I thought was I'll do a separate presentation on that, because I kind of running out of time on this presentation. So I've decided not to include it on this one. So there'll be a separate presentation looking at that kind of side of things for residential and domestic. So typical equipment, this is for wet sprinkler types. So each installation has an installation control valve, also called alarm valve. So kind of, again, two terms kind of mean the same thing. The installation control valve will come with a load of trim, and that trim will include a water motor alarm gong, typically, a pressure switch, a test and drain arrangement, and also some isolation valve or valves, depending on what is required. I say they're typically butterfly valve, but it could be a gate valve or what's called an OS and Y valve, which are going to different types of valve, which again I'll probably cover on a different presentation. Look at those. They're a bit more sort of beefy, bit stronger than a butterfly valve. Butterfly valves are more sort of convenient and compact. And the installation control valve will also come with some gauges as well, and say just bits of trim, which I'll go through in a bit more detail in the next slide. Each zone has got a monitored isolation valve. The isolation valves on the installation might be monitored, they might not be. They might be just secured in the open position. This all depends really about whether it's life safety or not. Life safety, we have to monitor all the stop valves. If it's not life safety, then we have the option to. Often that they will be monitored at the installation, and say each zone valve typically is monitored because typically you only zone for life safety, and life safety has to be monitored. So it kind of goes hand in hand really. If it's a sprinkler zone, it's likely to be life safety, which means it should be monitored. And monitored, if you don't know, just means that we have some electrical wiring into that valve, which is showing its status. So as soon as you start to close that valve, there'll be a fault signal generated to say that the valve is not in the fully open position, which obviously is very important. If the valve is closed or even partially closed, then we're not going to get the performance out of our sprinkler system that we're looking for. So we have the isolation valve. We also have a flow switch or zone check, which I'll come on to in a minute. And also we have a drain connection as well, which is also there to provide a flow test if required. So let's a bit more information about the equipment then. So this is an installation control valve. This one is a reliable brand one. Each manufacturer's got a different style of doing it, but they're all gone through the same approval process. Although on approvals, that is something you have to look at. So this valve here is LPCB approved, UL approved. It is FM listed, and VDS approved. So this one has all the four major approvals. But some valves they will just have one or two. That depends what you want. Also, there'll be American trim, there'll be UK trim, there'll be European trim. Again, depending on the way that the rules kind of differ, you get a slightly different set of equipment installed. But you can see the main things there: the pressure switch, the gauges, test and the drain. The bypass line, that's just like an equalizing line. It has a check valve inside. It's just there to stop kind of fluctuations in pressure causing an alarm to sound. And then the water motor alarm gong, it's a bell. It's a water-powered bell. When the alarm valve opens, see the water comes out through that valve at the side there. It says connection to water motor alarm gong. So only when the valve is open will water flow and power that bell to make it ring. Sprinkler zone equipment. So say in essence, we need a zone valve and we need a flow switch, but you can also buy the flow switch incorporated into a zone check, and that's what Project Fire sell. That's what, that's our kind of main product, our leading product. It's called a zone check, and that incorporates the flow switch inside, and also means that you can test that flow switch without discharging any water. So instead of having to get ladders and climb up into ceiling voids, connect hoses and run water to simulate a fire, to trigger that flow switch, we have a pump which just circulates the water, which means that you can do that a lot more quickly, less mess, less disruption. So you may not even need a sprinkler contractor to come in to do that test. You can do that test yourself. So the sprinkler contractors are going to do lots of other important work on the system, but that particular test can be done in-house. And then, so that product is approved by LPCB, FM, UL, and VDS. So we sell these products all over the world, and that's like a typical arrangement there. You can see the zone valve, and then the flow switch the zone check installed. We also developed Zone Check Addressable, which I might go through in more detail in another presentation. Just to say, we can link all the zone checks together on an addressable system, so a smart system, into a controller unit, which can then do all the testing and all the monitoring from a single location. And that will also monitor the zone valve at the same time and provide some feedback. It's got a battery backup, it's got a printer, say it's got text information to explain what's going on. So that's our latest generation product there. Okay, let's look a bit more detail in terms of the maximum size of installations and zones. So first of all, we have the statement here in Annex D. So maximum floor area per installation control valve is 12,000 square meters for any one floor. This is taken from Annex D, which is about zoned systems. Maximum floor area per installation control valve is 120,000 square meters. So just a note there, if it's unzoned and it's ordinary hazard, then this is the maximum total size. But say it did depend whether you've got a zoned or unzoned sprinkler system. So just bear that in mind, that these are taken from Annex D, which is all about zoning. So total maximum floor area per installation control valve is 120,000 square meters. So essentially you could have 10 floors of 12,000 to make your 120,000 maximum. But yeah, you don't want to get too close to the maximum, because if you suddenly then want to add an extension, then you're going to be over the top. Maximum size of zones. The maximum floor area per zone is 6,000. That is for property protection zoning, which, as I say, is quite rare, I think, to zone property protection. Personally, I'm not sure why it is so rare to zone property protection, because, say, for me, it does bring a lot of benefits to the table in as far as safety and monitoring and the ability to kind of identify more readily where a fire has taken place. But say most of the time we're looking under Annex F for life safety zoning, where the maximum floor area per zone is down to 2,400. So life safety zones are significantly smaller than property protection zones. But as I say, that's a maximum. So of course it can be smaller if you like. And often, they have to be smaller, which I'll come on to in a minute. So a few other points. Zoned installations not include any hazard greater than OH3. So again, not really sure why that is, but yeah, high hazard applications, high hazard buildings would not be zoned, because it says in the rules here that you could only zone up to OH3. So OH4 also would not be zoned. Car parks and areas involved in unloading and storage of goods should be unzoned. So again, we're not going to zone our car parks or kind of loading bays. Electrical monitoring of stop valves is required when zoning. So there you go. So it doesn't actually matter whether it's life safety or not. All stop valves, all zoned isolation valves should be monitored. Each floor of multi-story building must have at least one zone, and no single zone should encompass more than one ownership or tenancy. So that's a really key one, that is. So if you've got a multi-story building, you've got to have at least one zone per floor, which makes sense. And again, in terms of the signalling, we want to know which floor the fire is on. We don't want that zone to be spread over more than one zone. There is some specific rules in there about mezzanine levels. I think there is kind of a maximum size of a mezzanine which you can sort of include as part of the floor that it's on. But if the mezzanine is over a certain size, then it must have its own zone. But the key one here is it should not encompass more than one ownership or tenancy. So if you've got an office building, you probably only need one zone per floor because of the size of the actual floor area. Although, of course, if it's a really big office block, then you're going to need more than one zone anyway if you go over the 2,400 maximum. But often you would sometimes have more than one tenant on the floor, in which case you're going to need a zone for each one of those. And also, for me, you ought to be kind of thinking long term. You may have kind of one tenant at the present time, but in the future, maybe that tenant moves out. It's quite a large area. You might want to get two tenants in to kind of replace the one tenant that's moved out, in which case you're then going to need to split the sprinkler system into two zones, which is going to be, well, potentially there's going to be some hard work to sort that out. What you could have done at the start of the project is make it into two zones on the basis that, that is likely to happen in the future. And that's why also in a shopping centre, you're going to have lots of zones because each shop unit has its own zone, its own flow switch. So which often means that these zones are very, very small. Some of these kind of pop-up shops, are just space for one or two people, the desk, and then a tiny bit of storage in the back. So they're very, very small areas, but that would have to be a separate zone. The reason being, I think, is because the signalling, but also just the kind of hassle and disruption, really. If you've got like shop units change hands quite often, so one owner is going to move out, a new owner is going to come in. They want to do some changes. They want to refit the shop. Often that's going to involve turning the sprinkler system off and draining it down. So if they weren't on a separate zone, then you'd have to say to the shop next door, "Oh, sorry, we're going to turn your sprinklers off because these guys want to do some work." That's going to be some contractual legal stuff going on there between those two shops, because the one shop, they say, well, we're open, we want our sprinkler system on, this is important for our life safety, etc. So by having one zone per tenant, it just makes everything nice and clear. That one tenant can isolate and drain down independently from anyone else. But having said that, I mean, no tenant should be messing with that valve without informing the building owner anyway. And often you'll find that the zone valve is actually outside of their demise. So again, in a shopping centre example, you'd often find that the zone valve is just outside of the shop, back of the shop unit. That was actually in the kind of bit that belongs to the shopping centre itself, so that they can keep an eye on the valve and sort of be in charge of that. Okay, that's it for today's presentation. So that was all about installations and zones, understanding what the difference is, what equipment is required, and what limitations are in terms of size and ownership, etc. So next week we're going to be looking at sprinklers and mist part 2. So again, if you haven't seen part 1, have a look on our YouTube channel. Just search for Project Fire and Sprinkler Talk. And it comes up for me. Hopefully it will come up for you as well. But yeah, next week we're going to look at sprinklers and mist part 2. So we're going to be picking up on kind of that story, that thread, and sort of comparing the two systems, looking at the strengths and weaknesses, where they differ, and some limitations of mist systems. Obviously, I'm in the sprinkler world, so I kind of make no secret really that I'm a sprinkler fan. So yeah, we'll be looking at some of the limitations of mist systems as well. Okay, well, thanks so much for tuning in. Again, just a reminder, my name's Andy, work for Project Fire. You can check out our website at www.projectfireproducts.co.uk. You can send me an email at sprinklertalk@projectfire.co.uk, either about our product range or about these presentations, or any kind of technical question that you've got. Or give it a go to answer it, or point you in the direction of someone that can. And say if you've got any questions or feedback, pop them in the comments section now, and I'll be having a look at that over the next few minutes. All right, thanks so much, and have a good day. Bye-bye.